Hey, and we're back for another episode of the MMA Prospectus. I'm joined once again by Patrick Wyman and Tom Grant, who have carved out enough time to comfort me through my hours of loneliness for a look at the regional prospect scene in MMA, because God knows that is the best use of our time collectively.
Well, it's Friday. You know,
Yeah,
we're
it's
running out. We're getting to Friday. We're running out of content. Let's talk about face punching in venues so small that literally nobody's watching.
yeah, that what else are we gonna do? There's literally no better way I would rather spend my day right now at all. None. Can't think of even one goddamn thing. Anyway, so
With
I
that,
think we should
what
start
let me
out
keep going.
with with UFC 185 here, just to do a quick reflection on a pretty damn good card and a pretty interesting card from a prospect point of view last week. Before we get into next week and some other news that we wanted to cover from the regional scene in MMA. Favorite performers off the card, Tom? Who'd you see last week that really knocked your socks off?
Oh, I mean, hands down, it was Beneil Dariush, who just looked outstanding in what was a pretty tough test in a Darren Cruikshank. For a guy who I think kind of got pigeonholed as a grappler early in his career, kind of wrongly, because Dariush really flashed the striking in this one. Um, Obviously, Cruikshank missed weight or had a really bad weight cut. He kind of wrote off his performance based on that, but basically what I saw was Dariush beating the snot out of Cruikshank in every single facet of fighting, to the point where it was Cruikshank shooting on Dariush to take him down, which is, as he learned, a really terrible idea. You don't want to be on the ground with that man, and apparently you don't want to be standing with him either. So it was, for him, I think it was a very legitimizing sort of win, where a lot of people start seeing that Dariush is a legitimate prospect in that division.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Cruikshank would have been shooting for those takedowns anyway. That's kind of his MO, is to mix up like kind of quick rinse and repeat takedowns to break your rhythm. The way a Thai fighter will use dumps and trips in the clinch, Cruikshank uses those to break your striking rhythm and to force you out of punching distance, where you could overwhelm him with volume, and back into his kicking range, where he's going to and straight punching range, where he's almost certainly going to have the advantage. So those serve as kind of a deterrent for him. But in any case, no, he shouldn't have been doing that at all with Dariush, because Dariush is an ultra legit grappler and also a very good wrestler. Dariush spends a lot of time training with former collegiate wrestlers at the Church Boys Wrestling Club. It's at Calvary Chapel. It's basically the best wrestling club in Southern California that you're going to find. And Dariush spends a lot of time there, like with guys like Rafael dos Anjos, and Fabricio Verdum has spent a lot of time there in the past. Like some of the Rain guys will go over there to work on their wrestling as well. Like it's like an ultra legit wrestling club, and Dariush spends a lot of time with those guys. But yeah, no, Benny looked great. I'm just saying, I may or may not have called it. Not gonna crow about that one too much. Just saying.
Yeah, no, of course.
No, I mean he is dude's ultra legit. He's super
He
smart.
is.
He's very cerebral. He knows what he's doing. Like he's going to be a really good fighter.
Yeah, I think this said a couple of things for me. Particularly, first of all, it says that Dariush is a really smart fighter, because Cruikshank, like, the game for beating him is very well written out there, which is close him down with boxing inside and then out wrestle him and get him on the ground where he's not a very good grappler at all still. And Dariush played into that perfectly. I think the only other thing I worry about, I wonder about a little bit in this, is whether or not it's a sign that Cruikshank is sort of um, suffering through improvement. Like, he's trying to round out his game and be a more complete fighter and close down some of his technical gaps in his game. And I wonder if he's almost gone to the point of actually making his overall skill set worse, in that he's become a much more like a much more heavily dependent on his offensive wrestling rather than footwork and staying outside. And it's not necessarily like he's not such a great wrestler that that's gonna get him through fights like this, for instance.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's possible. I think the most parsimonious explanation is that Cruikshank is just not an elite fighter, and if you can beat him, you are either an elite fighter or well on your way to being one. Like, what do all of Cruikshank's losses have in common? They're all against guys who, at the end of the day, are just kind of flat out better than he is at something. And like, yeah, I don't disagree that there could be some growing pains in there with him, but I think as long as Cruikshank stays training with the people that he's training with, this is probably about as good as he's going to get, and this is probably about as good as he's going to look. I mean, I don't know. It's really hard for a guy to get much better when you're not training with when you're not out there training with the best, and Cruikshank is.
Yeah, I wasn't even suggesting that they're necessarily growing pains, but it's like that desire to improve, and maybe this is even just more of a like small camp symptom, is that idea of like, oh well, we need to improve, we need to work on this. So we're just going to really focus on that heavily for a while. That's all you're going to do, and that's what's going to make you better. And then the fighter himself just gets entirely refocused into a different channel. And that's what it feels like has happened with Cruikshank. Because you look, going back to the Njokuani fight, and just for the past, since then, he's really just looked to get out and get takedowns. Like, that's been what he's trying to do, is he's trying to wrestle. More than anything, or more than ever before. And it makes me wonder if it's just, it's the attempt of a small camp to refocus him and, like, shore up his holes. So, I don't know. Anyway, Pat, who are you impressed by, other than Dariush, your boy,
Joseph Duffy. Duffy looked awesome.
Yeah.
He is... I mean, he's already there. Like, it's clear that he's got the polish, he's got the skills. He's not a dude who's going to need, 3 or 4 like getting to know you fights. Like, he's ready to get progressive steps up in every bout from here on out, to the point where he could probably be fighting top 5 competition in 3 fights, give or take. Like, I would expect him to get a substantial step up in competition in his next outing. Like, even somebody at the fringes of the top 15 the next time out. It's clear that his skills are there, and especially if he keeps training with Zahabi, like, that just seems to be the right kind of matchup between a coach and a fighter. Like, I just think they're very much on the same page. And Zahabi teaches all the skills that Duffy still needs to work on, takedown defense, how to hit reactive takedowns, how to phase shift, things of that nature. That's really the weakness of Duffy's game, and Zahabi's the right guy to teach that to him. I don't think Duffy really needs to go to 145. Like, Zahabi mentioned in the immediate aftermath, oh yeah, he's going to 145. Duffy, when he was asked about it, was like, maybe. I don't think Duffy really needs to, but I think he'll be fine whatever weight class he's at. He's a very organic striker. Like, this is what I mean by that is, like, he's not just repeating combos that he hits on the pads. Like, he reacts to you in real time as things happen in the fight. Like, whatever openings you give him, no matter how small they are, he's going to find them and exploit them. And that's stuff that you can only learn through just thousands of hours of practice. Like, when he hit the head kick on Lindsay, which was barely blocked, but it rocked Lindsay. Lindsay's hands immediately went up, and Duffy immediately started pounding the body. He went to the body with like 3 straight shots, and that's what dropped Lindsay. But all of that happened in the blink of an eye. Like, he recognized the visual cue and immediately capitalized on it, and that is a really, really rare skill to have. So that by itself makes me think that Duffy's going to be fine. He also seems to be hitting harder than he ever did before. Like, he's really learning, I think, to sit down on his punches. So sky's the limit. I mean, I think he could easily be a top 5 fighter.
Yeah, I was absolutely blown away. I expected Duffy to look good in this fight. I feel like Jake Lindsay's an opponent that is ideally suited for a guy like Joe Duffy to look good against, but Pat nicely pointed out the fact that it's not just that he looked impressive, it was kind of how he went about it, how solid everything was, how like perfect the reactions were in the split second in the moment reactions. And then just knowing when the fight was like when Lindsay was kind of on the brink and just putting him away, it was just all around an excellent way to kind of enter into the UFC and kind of display to everyone that Yeah, he is ready to compete on this level, and more so than I think we even gave him credit for. I kind of expected Lindsay to maybe give him a round of not like real trouble, but like a little bit of struggle, and Duffy had none of him.
Yeah, it was definitely the performance I had actually I will say I had expected from Duffy. I definitely thought he would look that good against Jake Lindsay. Um, but one a fight I would really love to see, hoping that he doesn't drop to 145, is if they could put him in against Johnny Case. That would
Yeah.
actually be a really fun fight for both men. So hopefully he stays at. I would like to see him stay at 155. Honestly, I think right now that's a better division. As deep as it is, I actually think it's a more it's a more interesting division to climb right now than 145, which is just like thick with tough fights. I don't know. So I think, let's see. Other than that, I think I was actually most impressed by Henry Cejudo. Honestly, too. Like, that was a fight that I thought Carriasso would actually maybe give him some trouble, just because Carriasso's generally been the kind of guy that he hangs around for all for all 3 rounds, and if you're not good somewhere, he'll usually find a way to at least make the fight kind of tough there. And Cejudo didn't give him any room at all. It was incredibly impressive just how willing he is to trust his athletic advantages to dominate a fight even when he doesn't have the technical advantage. And that, I think, is going to carry him a long way.
Yeah, the image that consistently stuck in my head from that fight was Carriasso doing the exact right thing to counter what Cejudo was doing, throwing that right hook over the top as Cejudo charged forward. And Carriasso tagged him with it like probably 5 or 6 times cleanly, and Cejudo just absolutely walked through the shot. Like that was the thing that stuck with me was, okay, it's like Carriasso knows what he's supposed to do here. He's executing what is the right response to the situation, and it's just having absolutely no effect. I mean, his fist he was in more danger of breaking his hand on Cejudo's head than Cejudo was being knocked out. And like, I think it just speaks to how overwhelming Cejudo is physically in terms of his speed and his explosiveness and his strength and his power. Like, that there was just nothing that Carriasso could have done. Absolutely nothing. Like, there was no game plan that could have saved him there. One of the things that stood out to me was how far Cejudo still has to go, that like a better fighter with more power and more athleticism really could have gotten him in trouble in that fight. Carriasso just didn't have the tools to do. But there's still holes there, you know, for the moment. For the moment, Cejudo's physical gifts are kind of overshadowing the technical flaws. I think they came out particularly clearly when he tried to throw single kicks, and it was like he wasn't on balance when he threw them. He landed in weird positions. He didn't keep his hands up. Like, there were a lot of things that he screwed up on. But the thing is, how long are those holes going to be there? You know, that was the big question that I had, is like, you know, when his next opponent starts looking at the film, are they going to be fighting the version of Henry Cejudo that they hope exists, or the one that's going to show up on fight night? Like, I think we have to assume that Cejudo is going to make substantial progress from fight to fight.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I really like, is how, and what I mean too when I say how much he trusts his physical gifts, it makes me very confident that he'll improve a lot, is that he, you know, it's not like the Brock Lesnar thing where, despite being a physical full step above all of his competition, he was still getting hit and being like, "Oh God, I don't want to do this." Mm-hmm. Like, there were those moments where he would just have zero faith in his ability to do something athletically. When you see a fighter who has the faith that they're gonna do it the right way, essentially, like whatever they're gonna do, it's gonna get done right. That generally, I think, it lends itself a lot better to progression, because it means that they're willing to keep working on stuff even when it's not going well, and they're going to keep trying stuff in the cage and keep working out the kinks in their game, because they trust that even if they do it wrong, it's going to work. And that says good things to me.
There was I think right after that fight, Front Row Brian, regardless of what you think of him, made a fairly perceptive point about wrestlers who go into MMA, that there are some guys who are wrestlers who can fight, and then there are some guys who are just born fighters who happen to have wrestled. And he placed Cejudo in the latter category. And based on the way that he ate punches from Carriazo and just shrugged them off and they didn't even seem to faze him, it seems fairly clear that if you're going to go with that dichotomy, Cejudo falls into the latter category. Like, he's a mean dude. And I mean that in the most positive sense possible. Like, he's not going out there to try and hold you down for 3 rounds and just like not get better at anything else and just rely on his wrestling. Like, Cejudo wants to beat the crap out of you. And if his wrestling is the best way to do that, then he'll do that. If the best way to do that is by striking with you, then Cejudo is going to do that too. Like, all of those things are options for him. He's not afraid to do any of them. He's not afraid to get hit. Like, you know, all of these things bode really well. And so far, to this point, we have yet to see the dreaded Henry Cejudo kind of ennui set in, where he just gets uninterested in putting in work. Maybe that'll come. That's always a possibility. But for now, he's everything he's been cracked up to be.
Yeah, definitely is. Tom?
Oh.
How far behind are you, Tom?
I don't know if I'm far behind or if I'm just like missing every other word. So, if we were on Skype, I'd say I'm getting Skyped very badly right now. But I assume we're still talking about Cejudo, who just looked absolutely fantastic. And I have to agree with Pat's assessment of the idea, and I know Zane, you were kind of hit on this too. The idea that he's a fighter that just happened to wrestle, and a lot of his game appears to be transferring into MMA. I mean, we've seen high-level wrestlers come into MMA and be somewhat ineffective when they actually kind of try to apply their wrestling when strikes are involved. And the fact that Cejudo can just take a punch on the way inside, it really helps, but he does have effective ways of closing the gap, even if it does involve him eating a shot occasionally. I mean, it still works for him, and once he's inside and once he's on your body, there's very little you can do at this point. I do think he still needs some development time. Chris Carriazo is kind of like spending a career at being the B-side of matchups at this point, like on the higher levels. I think Cejudo, we're going to need to see some development before I'm ready to say that he's an elite fighter in this division, and I'm going to need to. I personally would like to see some consistency. But if this Cejudo or a better version of Cejudo shows up to the next 2 fights, I think he is going to be right into title talk in this division. I don't know if he's ready for Demetrius Johnson in that sense, who I think is quite possibly the most filled-in 3-dimensional fighter in all of MMA. But, I mean, just the sheer physicality of his style, he's got a lot of, I mean, like, he is technical when he gets in there wrestling, but he almost doesn't need it in some respects because he's just kind of fills in any problem or any technical deficit with just sheer physicality in a way that speaks very well of an MMA career.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 2 years in to MMA, so the flaws are going to be there, and the chances of him winning the title in the next year or 2 seem pretty remote with DJ at the top. But I mean, at least to me, he seems like a fighter that, 4 years from now we could talk about him winning a title. It's just not like we're not on a short time frame with him at all.
Well, I don't know. I disagree to an extent. I think that if Cejudo is going to win a title, it's going to be fairly soon. I don't think that he will. I don't think that he'll beat Demetrius Johnson for a wide variety of reasons. The foremost among them being the fact that, with Johnson still improving this fast, like, it's almost hard to imagine Cejudo making the kind of technical improvements that are going to make him competitive with a fighter of Johnson's caliber anytime in the foreseeable future before he starts to decline physically, and vice versa with Johnson. But I think if he's going to do it, it's going to be soon, and I think he wins one more fight in the UFC will put him in there with Johnson. It would be a tremendous upset if it happened, but this is, by definition, because of the way that division shakes out, because of what the UFC needs, because of their desire to build a Latino star come hell or high water, they are going to put him in there with Demetrius Johnson. That is going to happen.
Oh yeah. No, I think they will. I just don't know that. I don't know. I'm less sold on the whole age to physical decline thing. I think that his peak is probably. I'm much higher on the idea that he has like 6 or 7 years.
I mean, he may very well have that much time. But will MMA still have Cejudo's interest in 6 or 7 years?
Yeah, that could be. That could be. Yeah, that's true. And it could be that like losing a title shot early could be the kind of thing that keeps his fire stoked, that like keeps him motivated and keeps him working. I mean, it seems like winning a gold medal is what threw him off the wagon.
Yeah, true. And yeah, I mean, I kind of like just looking at the flyweight division right now. I mean, if we just pull up the UFC's rankings, right? I mean, how many guys would you not pick Cejudo over if they fought tomorrow?
DJ and Moraga. Or no, DJ, Moraga, and Benavidez. No, not Moraga. DJ, Benavidez, and Dodson. Dodson. That's it.
Yeah, and that right there is exactly the problem right? That like, if this were welterweight or lightweight or featherweight, we'd get, Cejudo would get a solid 4 or 5 fights at least. I mean, he would probably be on the Conor McGregor path, right? So he would have probably 5 fights before a title shot. Mm-hmm. But as it stands in this division, best case scenario for him, it would not even be super surprising. Would it if there was an injury or DJ wanted a short turnaround or something, and Cejudo didn't even have another fight? They just threw him right in there with Johnson. Like in, say, August or September, that wouldn't be surprising to anybody, would it?
No. I mean, if there's a division that we can compare this one to in some respects, I feel like the Olympic pedigree of Cejudo may cause him to go to the front of the line in a similar but not exact fashion like Sarah McMahon's Olympic pedigree kind of got her pushed to the front of the line of women's bantamweight, where it was a sellable point. There's also the style matchup with Ronda Rousey that people were kind of latching onto, but the idea of putting an Olympian obviously in there with another Olympian kind of pushed McMahon to the front of the line when she clearly kind of wasn't at that level developmentally yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just going to happen when we have divisions that lack anything resembling depth, especially in terms of the elite. Like, where even if they have a number of fighters, and it's not like there's nobody at flyweight, it's just there aren't elite fighters. There aren't a ton of elite fighters, which makes it really hard. When you get an elite, somebody who's clearly an elite talent, as McMahon was and as Cejudo is, what do you do with it?
Yeah, it's very hard. And the UFC has almost no interest in slow playing people. Like, very rarely when a guy and his camp really have the vision of what they want to do and what fights they want to take, I think, will a fighter get slow played? Will they get, softballed and, oh, yeah, we're just going to work on them, especially if it's, a regional talent that they really, I don't know, that is more valuable in that way. But usually the UFC is almost always interested in getting the biggest fight for a fighter as soon as they can.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I don't know. I mean, in the past I've been fairly critical of that, but given the way that things have played out recently, I'm less critical than I used to be, because you never know how long these fights are going to be there for. And anytime you try and hold off for a better time or wait for the fight to build, the opportunity could just be gone at any time. And you got to I think combat sports embodies the phrase, you've got to strike while the iron's hot, and the exceptions to that are so few and far between. Mayweather-Pacquiao being one example of okay, this is a bigger fight than it would have been 5 years ago. But the flip side to that is, how many other fights have there been, GSP Silva to name one, where it's you should have just done it. You should have just put it together.
It's true. So let's see, there are several fighters that we still need to talk about on this card, but the other big one that just cannot go without being talked about is Joanna Jedrzejczyk. And I don't know that I've seen anyone take to MMA's technical aspects as quickly as she has, men or women, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's going to beat her in the near future. I don't think. I mean,
I don't think so either. I think that it's much easier for her to improve off her fight with Gedalia than it is for Gedalia to improve off that fight, because it's a question of like Gedalia's, her physical tools kept her close, but she can't improve. Like, she can't be more physically imposing.
yeah.
So her striking was nowhere near keeping her in that fight at any point. And the improvements you'd have to make there would be massive. And all Jedrzejczyk has to do is look at the ways that they got her down and plan for that. Plan for the tools that Gedea was able to implement and work around them.
Yeah, I'll say this. The one thing I think that Gedalia had going for her, a lesson that Esparza just did not seem to learn after watching that tape, or her coaches didn't learn, or Esparza just didn't execute, was you can't just go out there and try to wrestle Jedrzejczyk and expect that to work at all. Because she's so much longer. She's very strong. She's got ridiculous leverage. She obviously has very technical takedown defense. She knows what she's doing as a defensive wrestler. You can't just shoot shitty takedowns from far away and expect them to work. You have to strike with her to suck her into your rhythm, and then once she's committed to striking, then you're going to have a chance of taking her down. And Esparza just looked so gun-shy from the first big shot that Jedrzejczyk landed on her. Like it was about 2.5 minutes in. It was that right elbow right on the point of Esparza's chin. Like, after that shot, Esparza completely went to pieces, and she never recovered from that. And but even before that, I guess Esparza was winning the fight just because she had shut down everything that Jedrzejczyk was trying to do with her wrestling. But Esparza couldn't keep that up forever, and Jedrzejczyk was getting her timing, and all she needed was one shot to throw Esparza off it. That should tell you that it was an inherently flawed approach in the first place.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I think it was so stark once Esparza got stuck on the outside that her wrestling was not going to get anything done, because Jedrzejczyk can wrestle really, really effectively out in the center of the cage. I think we only saw her defending takedowns against the cage once or twice, and one of those times was actually one of the times Esparza got her down on the mat. The thing is just at no point was Jedrzejczyk the one backed up against the cage. Esparza spent the entire fight with her back foot right up against the cage. And that right there, her inability to establish her striking and get Jedrzejczyk moving backwards, and Jedrzejczyk just being able to push forward on her, it completely negated her wrestling. Obviously, also the fear of getting hit. I think that the term that Connor likes to use, it disincentivized her to wrestle, and it was a really, really impressive performance. And it takes what I was kind of thinking was going to be kind of a wide open division for a little bit in women's strawweight, and it looks like it's going to be on lockdown, and we're going to have two really dominant women's champions for quite a while.
Yeah. Do you, off the tops of your heads, do you see anybody challenging Jedrzejczyk anytime soon?
Not unless Gedalia really improves her striking a lot. I think she could do it because I think she's the only woman who matches that sort of physical phenom ability that Jedrzejczyk has. I mean, like Marcos and Hill have some of that physical ability, but they're so far down technically that they're not anywhere close to that level. And then people are saying, Joanne Calderwood, and I love Joanne Calderwood, but I actually have no interest in that fight. Like, I just think Jedrzejczyk would just beast her and, beat her badly on the feet, just because Calderwood, for as diverse as she is and as technical as she can be, she's really not a great power striker, and she can be bullied by anyone willing to really push the pace on her.
Well, and I agree with all that. I think that's absolutely right. I think that people forget when they talk about Joanne Calderwood as a Muay Thai stylist that really Joanne Calderwood is an infighter. She is all about the clinch, and that's really the best facet of her game. She is not an awesome range striker at all. And she's super hittable at range. She's like I mean, Joanne Calderwood is almost too Thai in the way that she fights at range, where she's not super worried about getting hit as long as it allows her to get into the clinch. And so a lot of her defense is, okay, well, I'll eat this shot, but I'll step into it, and then I'm on the inside. And you can't do that against somebody who can pound you as effectively as Joanna Jedrzejczyk can from the pocket and from long range. Like, I just think that Calderwood would get eaten up all day. I don't think that's at all a competitive fight.
Yeah, I agree. Other than that, I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody lurking in that division. That it has a real shot to dethrone her right now. Just because like I said, her technical game is so good. Like, so many things that other women lack. That ability, like the way she counter wrestles. You're not just gonna get like, oh well, this woman's a good offensive wrestler, so maybe she'll take her down. It's like, no, she's really. You're gonna has to be an incredible athlete and a great offensive wrestler, and then has to be a good and powerful striker too. It has to be a combination of skills that I don't even think there's a woman's bantamweight that has that combination of skills. I mean, Rousey has the incredible judo game that matches up well with anybody because it's a skill that so few people can replicate. But outside of her, there are so few women that carry that skill set.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Alexa Grasso giving her problems. Give Alexa Grasso another year or so to develop. I could see Grasso giving her problems just because of the actual specifics of that matchup. I could see not so much as a typological thing, but just because I think Grasso would be down to bang it out in the pocket with Jedrzejczyk, and I think it's going to be interesting the first time we see somebody who's like down to scrap with Jedrzejczyk in her preferred area of specialization. I think that's going to be an inherently interesting thing. But Jedrzejczyk just has so much more firepower available to her than Grasso does. She just hits so much harder and is so much more physical at this point. She's also older and a better athlete and more developed and stronger. And yeah, so just from digging into that, you can see the depths of the problem here if we're trying to find somebody to compete with Joanna Jedrzejczyk in the near future. But then again, it's a division that's both deep enough already and young enough that we could get fighters coming out of almost nowhere to be really good very quickly. Yeah. Because there are a lot of fighters out there. There are a lot of women who demographically fall into that space where they're going to be in shape at 115 pounds. But also the hierarchy is not so established that it's really difficult to move up. So we could see like Angela Hill, like given her physical gifts, if she gets the right training, could be a legitimate top 5 women's strawweight in 2 fights. Despite the fact that she's only officially 2-0 or 3-0 right now,
something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's gonna be interesting to watch.
It will. So we gotta give a quick shout out to Elias Theodorou as well because he looked great. He did. Narvaez looked decent in the ways that I kind of thought he might in the beginning of that fight. Like he's not a bad range striker, not a great one, but he's at least picking up some skills there. But as Theodorou is just so physical and he's got that natural the hand-eye coordination and the accuracy that goes with that makes it's like even when all the technical parts aren't there, he's it's like the same thing with Cejudo where you've got all this faith in your athletic ability to just march through people and hurt them.
He is just super physical. His range striking is still not there. He is not, but he's not a range striker. He is a physical pressure fighter who wants to use his. I mean, actually, tell me what you think of this. Like right now, he's kind of like a poor man's Matt Brown.
I could see that. I mean, without the single massive skill dependency, I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's bigger, and I think he's stronger, and I think he's more physical. He's a much better athlete than Matt Brown is relative to his competition. But in that kind of single-minded desire to get inside and beat you up, and the idea that that's really the place where he's most comfortable. But I mean, I think Theodorou has a lot more potential just because he's younger and again, better athlete, has a lot more room to grow. But like, I think right now Theodorou is still a little limited, and next time out, I would like to see him offer more in the way of a striking arsenal at range and in the pocket.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those things that he kind of came out and performed in the way that I think all of us kind of expected him to, because that's his skill set and that's what he does. But it's pretty clear moving forward that he's going to need to build on top of it. He can't just get by kind of grinding guys out in the clinch and grinding them out in the ground. He's going to have to grow because there are going to be fighters that are not going to let him get inside, and he's going to have an answer for that when that day comes. And I think if we're on the verge of wrapping up this card, I think the one thing we really need to talk about before we let this one go is Sergio Pettis. And because I've kind of seen this debate spring up a couple places in which people kind of get into, is it a defense problem or a chin problem with Sergio Pettis? And I'm kind of the opinion, having watched that fight where he actually was fighting really well against Ryan Benoit. He had everything kind of going and was landing strikes, and got into one exchange where he raced left hooks with Ryan Benoit, and it was basically, if I recall correctly, it was the first solid strike on the chin he had taken that entire fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it sent him wobbling. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Sergio Pettis, he has trouble taking hard shots. I mean, you don't want to have to rely on fighting a perfect fight in which you don't take one clean shot, because it's fighting. You're gonna get hit clean at least once.
Yeah, I mean, it seems fairly clear to me that it's a chin problem, because defensively, it's not like he's getting hit with an overabundance of shots. Like, he's much more defensively sound from a technical perspective than his brother is. Like, way more sound in terms of his head movement, his ability to use angles to get offline, him pulling his head offline when he throws. He's much better at deflecting shots, which, to your point, Tom, I think you're absolutely right. That really was the first flush shot he got hit with the whole night. He's much better at only eating, say, 75% of a shot than Anthony is. Like, Anthony, when he gets hit, he gets clocked. May not get hit in absolute terms all that much, but when he's getting hit, he's getting hit. Sergio is much better at not eating the full brunt of a shot. You know, deflects off his shoulder, deflects off his glove, et cetera, which is how he had dealt with Benoit's left hook before that. Benoit hit him a few times, but he didn't hit him clean. You know, this is now 3 times in 5 UFC fights that Sergio's been dropped. He got dropped by Alex Caceres, who's not a power hitter. Neither is Matt Hobar. He got dropped by both of those guys. And, you know, there's an argument lurking in here about what happens, about one of the potential negative consequences of starting to compete when you're 13, 14, 15, which is how old Sergio was. It's not a great thing for you to be taking brain trauma when your brain's still developing. And whether that's the cause here, or Sergio's just not that durable to start with, or some combination of those things, it seems fairly clear to me. Like, yeah, I mean, Sergio could try and evolve to be like a pure range fighter who just never gets hit, but good luck with that. Like, good luck just never getting hit at all, because that's what he's going to need to do to guarantee that he wins.
Yeah, it's sad to me, because it's one of those things I think that fighters are much more willing to write off and be like, oh, I got caught. You know, what are you going to do? Everybody gets caught. And it's like, yeah, but when you're doing everything perfectly in a fight, and when you're absolutely winning it, losing on one punch is an amazingly bad sign. Like, you know, Czech Congo knocking out Pat Barry, that says a lot of bad things about Pat Barry. Like, we already knew them at that point, but it's not like you can be like, oh, I just got caught. It's like, he was out, and he hit you, and you got knocked out. You know, that's the way where Sergio Pettis is getting into, is this point where it's like, you had this guy beat in every foreseeable area. You were out grappling him, you were out wrestling him, you were out striking him, and he hit you once, and that's it. And how do you how do you turn that around? How do you say, and could be one of those things that as he gets older and as he continues to develop technically, that will get better, but it'll probably never go away. At the best, he could end up being this sort of like Mike Pyle-esque fighter who gets into these scraps and can win and beat some guys, out grappling them and out wrestling them and out ground and pounding them, and then sometimes just walks out and gets hit by the first shot and knocked out in 15 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much more worrisome when that's your when those are your options at 21 or 22.
Yeah.
Than in Mike Pyle's case, where he's 37 now.
Yeah.
Like, or in Pat Barry's case, like, Pat Barry, when he got knocked out by Czech Congo, was like 33 and with a lifetime of head trauma in kickboxing and MMA. Like, so it was clear that we were at the end of a long progression that was exacerbated by like subpar defense and everything. Where in Sergio's case, we're talking about a guy who's still very young and still can't take a shot. Like, if you can't take a shot when you're 21 or 22, how are you going to take a shot when you're 30? Like, these things do not get better with time. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
And I think it also needs to be said, the idea that Pettis is, we've already said, he's a pretty competent defensive fighter. It's not like the now lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos. When he first came into the UFC, he really didn't know all that well how to take a punch. And he started, when he got clocked by like the hardest uppercut ever by who was it? Who?
Jeremy Stevens.
Yeah, Jeremy Stevens, who hit like a Mortal Kombat uppercut on him. I mean, there's a big difference between that to being a fairly savvy defensive fighter already, and then getting hit once clean puts you down.
Yeah,
like, there's
it's
not
Khorassani territory.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but at least in Khorassani's case, he exacerbates a bad shin by being super hittable already.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough. Like, and in fairness, as far as this particular shot goes, like if we were looking at this event in isolation, like Beneil is a real hitter. Like he throws one of the meanest left hooks that you will find, like regardless of weight class. Like that is his money punch, and he throws it real hard. But like, it's not in isolation. This isn't a one-time thing, and that's what makes it worrisome, and that's why we're talking about it. Like, yeah, I mean, if this were the only time this had happened, we could write this off as, oh yeah, he really did just get caught. But this is part of a larger pattern.
All right, so there are a lot of interesting fighters coming up on this UFC Fight Night card that I want to get to a few of them, because there's really only one name that's like a must talk about. But before that, and this, we're leaving behind 185 now because we've spent way too much time on that. But it was a good card, so whatever. But that's the news that Waleed Ismail is talking to the Brazilian Athletic Commission about starting an amateur fight circuit, an amateur belt essentially in Brazil, like an amateur fighting circuit and amateur titles and an amateur organization in Brazil. And from the my first reaction is that that's a great idea. It would be good to get some structure in one of the leading MMA countries that is still, at the lowest levels, almost entirely structureless. But, Pat, you were immediately, that it was not your immediate reaction.
No, I honestly, I think it's because Waleed doesn't want to fucking pay guys. Like, you want me to be totally honest about it?
Yeah,
it's because,
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's because Waleed doesn't want to pay dudes even the pittance that you pay low-level Brazilian professional MMA fighters. So first and foremost, I'm not going to have a whole lot of sympathy for a dude who's just trying to get by without paying fighters, which is what has happened in a lot of the United States with the amateur system. They're amateurs.
It's true.
They're effectively professional fighters, and they treat like they're professionals. They're just not getting paid for it, which is bullshit. So on the face of it, it's bullshit. Second, it's not going to work unless this is the only option available. It's not going to work from a structural perspective, because if you can go, even if you're only getting paid $50 to fight, you're still getting paid $50, which is more than nothing. So, like, I think it doesn't work when MMA is almost straight up a sport of hunger for a lot of these dudes. Like, they're fighting because they need the $50. Like, they legitimately need that. Yeah. And we're talking about dudes who were sleeping on gym floors, or living in some hellish favela, and this is their way out. Like, hey, so I think it's both morally objectionable, and I think it's a really bad thing from the perspective of, like, you're not going to get guys to do this if there's a promoter who's going to pay them $50 to fight professionally. Like, it's either, and there is not such a glut of guys who are willing and able to fight that, like, you can convince them to fight for nothing. There is an active market for shitty MMA in Brazil where you can get paid at least a pittance for that. So
you're a real buzzkill.
I mean, I know. It would be different if this were Russia, where there were ways of supporting amateur athletes and there were actual real structures in place to do that. But it's not. This is Brazil, and, like, I mean, because my coach and I have talked about this before, and, like, my coach is from an upper middle class family, and, like, never really had to worry about that kind of stuff when he was taking his first few fights, and he always had jobs, and, like, but we talked about amateur MMA once, and I'm like, do you think they'll ever do that in Brazil? And he looks at me and he just starts laughing, and he's like, no, there's no, you could never make amateur MMA work in Brazil, because guys, even like a 17-year-old kid from the favela, if you say, well, we want you to fight for free, he's still going to tell you to go fuck yourself, because he knows that has value, that's a thing that people are going to pay to see, and and you should be getting paid for it. Like, amateur MMA, I think in most cases is still bullshit in the U.S. or no matter where you are. Like, you are providing a service that people are paying money to see. You should get paid for that. And, like, you know, if you're going to lose brain cells and you're going to get punched in the face, get paid for it if you can. But you know, it's fucking Waleed. Like, who knows where it'll go anyway? Even if he's not doing it, and you can find guys to fight.
It's true.
Yeah, and it is. I think, Pat, you brought up the thing. The only place where it really feels like the amateur program really is what people want an amateur MMA program to be is in Russia, because the gyms are state sponsored. The athletes are very well taken care of compared to their contemporaries in Brazil and in the United States. So the amateur circuit is able to be more of guys of a similar experience level, raising their experience level before they jump into the professional ranks. Whereas in the United States, I mean, Pat brought up, I mean, usually it is promotions that aren't looking to pay guys but want them to fight full unified rules most of the time. Like, there are some good amateur leagues out there. There are tons and tons of promoters who just don't want to pay dudes and want them to fight full MMA rules or full unified rules.
It's true, and I think that the thing that I wish were more the case was not so much that amateur MMA was a case of not getting paid, because partially to me that's such an American invention, is like, we're gonna call it amateur so we don't have to pay you. Like, that seems like such an American way of doing things compared to other parts of the world, where they're like, it's amateur, or we're teaching you how to do this, so we'll pay for your food and clothing and shelter and bring you up through the ranks while you go. Whereas in the U.S. it's sort of like, it's amateur, so we're just not going to pay you, but you'll fight anyway, and that's the American way.
Well, and it gets us. It's similar in some ways to like to like college sports in the U.S. where it's like, or even the Olympics, where we have to preserve the purity of sport by not paying you for all of your hard work, because that would ruin everything.
And because, I mean, in my head, what I would like to see is just, I think an amateur circuit would be great in Brazil. Pay guys, but just knock down the rule set. Like, 3-minute rounds, pads, or shin guards, maybe even a head helmet. I don't know how much those help. I don't think they help that much. And then, really training the refs and the corners and the doctors and all that to be hyper vigilant about stopping fights. Like, that's what you want to see out of amateur MMA, is you want to see shorter time, more emphasis on safety.
Yeah, and if that's what they were going to do, I would be behind it completely. But I'm sure what Waleed is planning is just normal fights where you don't pay the guys.
Yeah, I'm sure
And so, yeah, no, I mean, if that's what it were going to be, if it were a legit amateur system, especially for guys who are like, I would much rather see the squads of like 15 and 16-year-old Brazilian kids who are fighting professionally against like grown ass adults. I would much rather see them fighting other, 15, 16, 17-year-old Brazilian kids like in some sort of well-regulated amateur system. But Brazilian regulation, like those, I mean, not like we all love Brazil. We are fans of Brazil
We are.
collectively
Yeah.
on the MMA Prospectus. But like, let's be real. Let's be real for a second. Like that kind of corruptionless control and bureaucratically smooth running kind of thing is just not a strong suit in general, and especially not with regard to combat sports. So, let's hope that they can make something like that work. I mean, if they're going to go ahead with it, let's hope for the best. I just don't think there's a lot of reason to be real optimistic about it.
I mean, Walled wants guys who are training full time to compete full contact for free. What does he think this is? Jiu-jitsu?
That's right. There you go. That's our traditional martial arts bias right there, full frontal. But anyway, let's move on to the fight night card. I think we've gone through that Brazilian amateur MMA idea thoroughly, and I'm not going to start at the bottom of this card because there's one name above all that we have to talk about, and that's Gilbert Burns. He is the blue chip prospect that we are expecting big things out of, and he should have a fun opponent in front of him that he should get to show off against, in my opinion. Alex Oliveira is a good fighter. He's a fun fighter. He's actually a fighter I have a lot of interest in down the line. But this is an opponent that should be able to test Burns a little if he wants to stand up, and should otherwise be a walk.
Yeah, I mean, I would have picked Burns over Josh Thompson, which was the original fight here. I seriously would have. I'm that high on Gilbert Burns. He reminds me a very great deal of Jacare in terms of the athleticism and the combination of world-class jiu-jitsu. He's not the jiu-jitsu practitioner that Jacare was. He didn't have quite those credentials. But in terms of a really MMA adapted and focused grappling game, like he is, I mean, to come back to what we were talking about with Cejudo, where we were, guys who were wrestlers who happened to fight, or guys who were jiu-jitsu practitioners who happened to fight, or fighters who happened to do jiu-jitsu or wrestling or whatever. Burns is a fighter. He's a mean dude. He grapples mean. He strikes mean. He does everything mean. He's an incredible athlete, first and foremost. I mean, he's a specimen. He's really fast. He's really explosive. He hits really hard. I think everything is there for him to be a really, really successful fighter moving forward. Also, the idea of picking him over Thompson, I really think Thompson's time is kind of done, and I think he's declining. He's not shot or anything, but I do think he's declining. While Durinho is very much on his way up.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, in the sense he very much reminds me just kind of as a complete fighter, like as a package of Jacare. And I think Burns is on. I think he's a fast riser in this division. I think he's going to be in that top 10, top 5 range very, very soon, competing for titles. Just an outstanding athlete, mixes things together really well, wrestles extremely well. He's basically Jacare if Jacare had gotten into a big time camp from the word go, and had committed to MMA like immediately, rather than kind of dipping his toes in the water and then kind of backing off and then going back in. And yeah, Burns super legit grappler, even past credentials. I mean, we've seen plenty of jiu-jitsu guys with amazing credentials who have not been able to transfer to the cage. His grappling game very neatly transfers to the cage very nicely. The armbar he hit in his last fight was just a brilliant piece of grappling. He can beat you up on the feet. He can take you down. He can submit you on the ground. I think he's going to be a real problem for lightweights moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, and like one of the things that gets me the most hot and bothered about him is the idea that he seems very much committed to learning the Henry Hooft striking system, and to the point that he will spend has spent significant portions of fights standing and working on his striking and just I'm going to beat this guy in the feet. I'm going to beat this guy in the feet. Strike, strike with them and all that, and has shown that he has, not just that he can learn how to do that, but that he actually has knockout power and the ability to put his strikes together in a way that is going to be dangerous down the road. And it's hard not to look at him and be really excited to see him fight more. And like I say, it's too bad for Alex Oliveira because I like Oliveira. He's got a fun kind of. I've said that it's like if you told it's like somebody who's fighting like Anderson Silva but without being Anderson Silva. He has like that same idea of like I've watched Anderson Silva fight and that's how I want to model my game, but he's not obviously that level of athlete or anything like that. So it's just but you still get some of that fun mix of skill in there.
Yeah, I actually really liked what I saw from Cowboy Oliveira on film. I thought that he was he's very physical. He's very athletic. I was surprised by that. I was surprised by how by what a specimen he was. And yeah, there's he's not. I mean, it is kind of unfortunate that this is the opponent that he's ended up with because Durinho's probably going to run through him. But I really liked his head body combinations. Like he's a good combination. He's a really good infighter. I was surprised too at how good a wrestler he was. At least he's really got a preference and a fondness for slams more than he should. It reminded me a lot of Leandro Ego, who's going to be competing at bantamweight on this next season of the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. The way that he really likes those high amplitude takedowns. Now, unlike Ego, Oliveira is not great at establishing control after he slams you really hard on the mat. He's got a tendency to let you scramble back. But I liked what I saw. Like the talent is absolutely there. He could be a legit good fighter. Kind of one of these under the radar short notice pickups for the UFC, where you're like Kevin Souza, who's fighting on this card, very much the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to echo what you both said, when I flipped on Cowboy Oliveira, I was very impressed. I kind of expected him to be late notice filler, and his athleticism jumped out at me right away. And I was glad to hear both of you say that because I was worried I had just been watching too many middleweights, and finally saw oh my God, someone who can move. But he's actually very light on his feet, but he transitions very quickly into wrestling. Which anytime I see a guy kind of bouncing on the balls of his toes a lot. I get very worried about how well they'll be able to defend a quick shot, and he's able to do it pretty well. So strikes very well. He's going to be a good pickup for the UFC overall. He's just going to most likely get murdered in this first fight, just taking it on short notice. Just get your foot in the door any way you can these days, especially at lightweight.
One of the things I got to say just before we move on that I really love watching him that he does, and I'm going to watch for him to do. I don't think he'll be able to do it on Burns, but in the future, is when he goes from a single collar tie to hooks in the clinch. Like he'll jump on the collar tie and then just start nailing the guy with left hooks. Like it's just like he'll throw out a looping hook just to get that collar tie and just start drilling hooks behind it. And it's so fun to watch. So I'm hoping to see that at some point in the future. I think the other probably top prospect to watch out of this is probably Andre Fili. He's the guy that's probably on the way up the quickest right now. He's been in the game for a little while now, but he's only 24, Team Alpha Male product. Still needs to learn some fight IQ stuff, but his game looks like it's really coming along, especially the striking parts of it, really nicely.
He's I would describe him as the quintessential offensively focused fighter. He's very much he's very offensive in every phase. He shoots a really beautiful double leg, even though he doesn't come from a wrestling background. Really gets a great drive on it. Really good punch kick combinations. He's pathologically aggressive in the way that he fights. All of this to a fault. He leaves himself way too open to getting taken down, and he kind of relies on his ability to scramble to get back up. But I had the pleasure of interviewing him this last week. He is a super fun dude. He's got he really has star potential. I think, which is not something that we talk about super often on this show. I mean, we mostly stick to the technical aspects, but like if he can keep delivering in the cage, he could be the next like kind of Joe Lozani action fighter, but with a much higher ceiling. I don't think he ever wins a title, but I think he could definitely be kind of a top contender, hang around in there, and get paid a lot because of his style and because of his personality and his ability to sell himself. But just a great dude. Like, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should, because he's really fun and funny. So can't speak highly enough of him. He should win this fight handily. Pepe is another one of these offensively focused fighters, but unlike Fili, Pepe can't take a shot and is just not nearly as skilled.
No, Fili is he's a goofball in all the best ways. And it's just a lot of he's a really fun personality, and then he gets after it in the cage. You pointed out the idea that he wrestles really well despite not coming from a wrestling background. I think he trains at one of the best camps in MMA, in Team Alpha Male, in which anyone that comes out of that camp, they seem to really have a good system put together there. Obviously, it's gotten better now that they've kind of organized themselves a little bit more, but even then, they were very consistent at turning out top talent. And you get an athlete like Fili in there, and he kind of clicked into that group as well as he has. He's going to be, I'm expecting another jump forward for Fili, kind of one of those, like, every time he gets in the cage, he's improving. And I'm not that big on Pepe. I don't like his overall game in MMA. I think, he tends to end up on the bottom a lot, and then he plays what I kind of like to call spaz guard, where he just goes absolutely nuts from the close guard. We're talking about a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who got knocked out from playing when he was playing close guard, which you almost never see. You almost never see that. It was just because he was going absolutely nuts.
Let's not talk about Pepe too much, because he's not very good, and we shouldn't talk about him.
Sorry,
that's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down.
I fully expected some point for Andre Fili to do like the full Shogun diving punch onto a prone Pepe, and for that I fully intend to send him a picture of pizza tonight, because if you don't know, one of his things, he absolutely adores pizza, and when he's cutting weight, he asks people to send him pictures of slices. So he's just a really fun dude, and really good. I think really talented. The one thing I'd say is his grappling is mostly based on explosive scrambling, which is going to have to improve as he kind of moves up in the division, and is the one thing that I could see maybe Pepe getting him with, is if they get into like an explosive 50-50 scramble and Pepe slaps something on.
So we had two guys at the bottom of the card that I think have more potential than it seems like for the bad matchups they got coming into the UFC. I want to know who you guys are higher on, because I know who I'm higher on, but I am guessing other people are going to say differently. And that's Leonardo Mafra and Christos Giagos. And go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, personally, I'm a big fan of Mafra. And I know that he looked bad against Rick Story, and he's already had a shot in the UFC all the way up at middleweight against Thiago Perpetuo, where he got knocked out. But he is just like a ball of fast twitch muscle on the feet, and I feel like there's a lot to be developed out of that if he can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I actually think it's interesting that you paired them together, Giagos and Mafra, because I think they're very similar fighters in terms of what they like to do and what capabilities they have. First and foremost, they're both awesome athletes. Like Giagos was making Durinho look like average in the speed and athleticism department when they fought, and Durinho is an awesome athlete in his own right. So Giagos is very much on that level, and if you watch the way that he fights, it's obvious like how quick he is and how strong he is. And the same is true of Mafra. Mafra looked faster than Rick Story, who's a good athlete in his own right. He was faster than Thiago Perpetuo when they fought, and Perpetuo is a very good athlete in his own right. I think the problem was Mafra was one of those dudes who got into the UFC too early. when he was coming onto the first season of The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, and it was clear that he was in there as like a personality and looks dude more than he was because they thought that he was going to win, which it kind of did him a disservice. But when he lost that fight against Perpetuo, he went out and he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He just blasted dudes on the regional scene. Like, I don't know if you guys have watched those fights in between.
Yeah.
But he was really good, and he was clearly making improvements to his game from fight to fight. He's got kind of the full chute box game in terms of the aggressiveness and the power and the emphasis on finishing fights, but he also does good work from top position, which is what makes me think that he's going to win this fight pretty handily against Carrizosa, because Carrizosa likes to grapple and Carrizosa is willing to give up position for submissions. And if Mafra gets on top of you, he's probably going to hit you really, really hard. Like, if you pin yourself in a place where he can hit you, he's going to hurt you, whether that's up against the cage or on bottom. I like both of these dudes. I think they both win their fights.
Yeah, well, I feel like you guys kind of covered them pretty well, so I'm going to go completely off script and not even answer Zane's question, well, in the context that he said. I'm going to go with Tony Martin, who's actually on the main card, but I think that he's a guy that's getting overlooked because if you go look at his two fights the first two fights he got in the UFC were sneaky hard. He got Rashid Magomedov in his first fight, who he almost beat, if you remember. He had him in a deep armbar. And Magomedov has gone off to turn out to be a pretty darn good lightweight. And then he faced that Beneil Dariush dude that we were talking about earlier, who, is pretty good at the fighting stuff. And then the first, actual kind of, newcomer fight to the UFC he kind of got was his last fight against Fabricio Camões, and he absolutely owned a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt on the ground. And obviously the belt rank doesn't mean that much in MMA, but a competent grappler who he kept in a Kimura sequence for basically an entire round and then broke a shoulder. So I think Tony Martin's a guy who kind of is getting underlooked because he got a really tough two sets of fights. Who I don't even think the UFC understood how hard of a welcome to the UFC they were giving this guy. And now he's getting Leandro Santos, who obviously very experienced, very good grappler. So to see what Tony Martin does with him will be very interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting fight in general, mostly because I don't think Leo Santos is any great shakes. That's a totally winnable fight for Martin, and it would not at all be surprising if at some point he made a big jump, because all the tools are there. He's what you would call a toolsy prospect, right? That if going with the way that we originally conceived this show and looking at fighters the same way that we look at prospects in other sports with some of the same terminology. Martin is that quintessential dude who gets drafted in the later rounds, who's got everything that you're looking for, and the question is whether or not he's going to put those all together with the right skills to be competitive. Because he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's got the power, he's got the feel for it. I mean, he's clearly a tough dude. The question is whether his skills catch up with what he's got to offer physically, and that makes this a particularly interesting fight because Leo Santos is a dude who has the skills, especially in the clinch and especially on the ground, but just has none of the physical tools at all. Leo Santos is one of the worst athletes at 155, and the fact that he's been competitive in 3 or 4 fights so far is a minor miracle. So you could easily see Martin overwhelming him here, or you could see Martin doing something dumb, ending up on the bottom and getting arm triangled with a quickness.
Yeah, unfortunately for me, this is kind of one of those fights where I really want to be high on Tony Martin, a lot. I really like everything he does, and I especially, from before he got into the UFC, I remember I wrote a Welcome to the UFC article on him, and I was like, he's a power, he's a dude who understands power submissions from top control, and I love that.
Yep.
He knows how to chain power submission sequences from top. And so few guys do that in MMA at all. Anywhere. It's just it's one of those skills that used to be big, but is totally gone out of the sport. And it makes him really interesting. But I feel like this is one of those fights where it's going to be the first round is going to be we'll see who's the better fighter. and then for the next 2 rounds, we're going to see who gasses harder.
Yeah, I think that's actually a totally appropriate way to view it. Like, we'll see whether Martin has managed to get over his just horrendously bad gas tank, or whether Santos, by being Leo Santos, gasses himself out shooting for shitty shot takedowns from 15 feet away in the middle of the cage. Like, also an option, also a thing that could happen. So I would look for this. I don't think this is going to look like a real great fight, but it's going to be interesting if this is the lens through which you're viewing it.
Yeah, you should be viewing it through this developmental lens because it is a fight that could show something really interesting from Tony Martin. But I do think it has a very good chance to be 2 rounds of incredibly bad MMA, which is why I'm picking Leo Santos to win it, is because I expect him to be more consistent while gassed over those last 2 rounds than Martin.
Yep. Exactly the same reasoning as I have. Exactly this.
And that's a tough place to be when you're picking a fight. To be like, well, they're both going to gas hard, but he's a little better when he's gassed.
Yeah, but if nothing else, I'm excited to see Tony Martin because MMA needs more north-south Kimuras. And if he can deliver that, I will be happy.
Other than that, I think that pretty much covers everybody that I really wanted to talk about. Amanda Nunes should do awful, terrible things to Shayna Baszler. I guess Nunes isn't even really a prospect anymore. She's actually been around quite a while, but that's worth a mention. And then I'm a little interested to see if Freddie Serrano can actually become a decent fighter, because he's one of the few fighters coming off that show that has the physical tools. But he was obviously so undersized in his bracket, and dropping down should help him a lot. So I expect to see him beat 7 shades of shit out of Bentley Seiler and hopefully look like a marginal prospect.
Yeah, that was weird, right? Like, looking at this, because Seiler is the favorite, but Seiler just did not look like a very good fighter to me, because I mean, Serrano is a hell of an athlete. Serrano is also the only guy who was on that show who had any sort of wrestling pedigree at all.
Yeah.
The only problem is that Serrano is 35, and is still undersized for 125. Like, he's really a straw weight, if not like an atom weight. Not that division would ever happen in men's MMA, but like, I mean, he's a dude who could legit make 105 pounds probably. So take that as you will.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like, this is one of the very few like matchups of tough Latin America people that I will watch and not just want to burn the whole thing down.
Yeah. I expect to see Freddie Serrano look like at least like a guy who could maybe beat Danny Martinez someday. You know?
Yeah. That's about the bar that we're looking for here, right?
Yeah. That's pretty much the high water mark that I'm setting. So, do we have anything else? Oh, we wanted to cover very briefly before we get out of here. 3 Russian fighters fought this last week. Abdulkarim Edilov, one of the best light heavyweight prospects in the world. Hussein Kaliev, one of the best welterweight prospects in the world. And Magomed Bulatov, one of the best flyweight prospects in the world. So they all won. They all dominated. They all look great. That's something that people should be like tracking down and watching.
Bulatov, he attempted a Showtime kick, which was awesome.
Nice.
Not land it, but he tried it.
Hey.
And Haliev, just the sequence, the whole fight-ending sequence there was so fucking cool, because he throws a wheel kick, which he misses. The other guy tries to charge in as he's coming back down to his base from the wheel kick. Kaliev grabs double collar ties, snaps him down to a front headlock, gets him, like, kind of just pushes him over to the ground, gets on top, and then just beats him up for the finish. And that was the whole fight. But it was like, what better sequence to sum up Hussein Kaliev than wheel kick to front headlock to snap down to beating the shit out of somebody from top position? It's just summed up his whole game. Like,
I was gonna say, don't forget the part where he then choked the dude unconscious and then helped wake him up and then picked the dude up and carried him around the cage.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like, cause he's another one of those guys. He's a goofball in all the best ways. Like, he's gonna get over with fans so easily once he makes it to a big time promotion because he is just such a likable, goofy dude.
Well,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I don't know what the UFC's waiting for on him because he's been to the U.S. He's got a visa. He is, he's training with a U.S. team that the UFC's familiar with. They just need to sign him. Like, there's no reason.
He was hanging out with the UFC champions in their recent visit to Chechnya. Like,
Yeah.
he was there with them. It seems weird that the UFC hasn't jumped on this guy yet.
Yeah, he's also, in case you're not following, Ramazan Kadyrov, Chechen president / dictator / head of Chechnya, Ramazan Kadyrov. If you're not following him on Instagram, he plugs Khaliev all the time. Like, Khaliev has like a huge media profile in Chechnya, which like may not seem like a high bar to outsiders, but considering the lack of like alternative means to become a star there, like the fact that he is as closely connected to those government figures as he is, like gives Khaliev like a huge advantage. He is practically a demigod to the Chechen fight community. So, and all without ever having competed in a major show. Like, dude has legit star potential. I think you're absolutely right about that, guys.
So that's a good note to close on. Good stuff. Lots to talk about. Next week, we'll be talking about the fallout from this card, and I think then we've got a week off. So I think what I'd like to focus on is the 2 upcoming tough seasons because they've actually got some good fighters on those shows. Maybe talk about a few of those guys, and that's what we're sticking around for. You can follow me at DZaneSimon on Twitter, Tom at TP_Grant on Twitter, Patrick at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. Find me and Tom at Bloody Elbow, Pat over at SureDog. Remember to subscribe to MMA Nation for all sorts of other videos. Give this video a like, thumbs up thing. That helps us a lot more than you'd think it does. And stay tuned for next week. Thanks.